In the hushed corridors of the Vatican, where marble meets candlelight and time moves like drifting incense, there is a presence rarely spoken of aloud. It is not the Pope the world sees resplendent in white, smiling from balconies, blessing the faithful in St. Peter's Square. No, the figure we trace tonight moves quieter than liturgy, softer than parchment, and far deeper than the gilded throne. He is called the Black Pope, not for darkness, but for the black cassock he wears, not for evil, but for the power he is. Whispered to possess, to understand him, we must step beyond the sanctified halls and into the hidden rooms, into the society of Jesus known to most as the Jesuits, a brotherhood forged not in pomp but in fire. And at the heart of it always stands one man, the Superior General, appointed for life, bound to obedience, silent to the world, but said by some to command kings and even guide popes from behind the veil. So, who is he, and why for centuries has he been both revered and feared? The title Black Pope is not official. It is part rumor, part reverence, part warning. It emerged in the 18th century, whispered by cardinals and courtiers, by monarchs and ministers, and by those who had reason to believe that the true power of Rome did not always rest on the papal throne. Sometimes it was held in the hands of a man who knelt only to rise with strategies no crown could match. This idea that a single religious figure could rival or even eclipse the Pope himself feels, at first, like a myth, but history often shelters its truths in shadows. And this shadow, in particular, stretches across centuries of empire, war, diplomacy, and devotion. To begin, we return to the origins of the Jesuit order formed in the 16th century by Ignatius of Loyola, a Basque soldier turned mystic, whose wounds led to visions and whose visions gave birth to a movement. The Jesuits were not monks, not traditional priests. They were spiritual warriors, trained, disciplined, mobile, intellectual, obedient. And central to their mission was structure a strict hierarchy built on total obedience to the Superior General. From this structure came remarkable unity, an unshakable sense of direction, and, eventually, immense influence. The Superior General, often residing in Rome, held authority over thousands of Jesuits across continents. He approved missions, shaped doctrine, settled disputes, and directed the pulse of one of the most intellectually formidable institutions in the world. His power was spiritual, yes, but also educational, political, and in some cases diplomatic, and he answered to no bishop, no cardinal, only to the Pope himself. And many whispered, not always even to him. From the very beginning, the Jesuits inspired awe and unease in equal measure. Their members infiltrated courts and advised kings, opened schools and converted empires. They translated sacred texts in China, negotiated peace treaties in Europe, trained princes in South America. Wherever they went, they became invaluable and unervingly capable. And through it all, the Superior General remained largely unseen. He did not address crowds. He did not ride in open carriages. His power was not one of spectacle, but of coordination, information, and silent command. Like a conductor whose baton moved through air, he shaped the music of empires. Was this simply devotion or something closer to control? In 1767, the King of Portugal accused the Jesuits of inciting rebellion in South America. In France, Enlightenment philosophers feared their intellectual dominance. In Spain, they were viewed as a threat to royal authority, and in the papal court, their proximity to influence made them a target of political suspicion. By 1773, the pressure became too great. Pope Clement XIV, under duress from multiple European crowns, issued a decree to suppress the Jesuits. The Society of Jesus was dissolved, at least officially. Their properties were seized, their schools closed, their members scattered. And yet, even then, the idea of the Black Pope did not fade. In fact, it grew, because if a figure could be feared even in absence, what does that say of the reach he once held? The first Superior General, Ignatius of Loyola, had written that obedience should be blind. A Jesuit should be like a staff in the hand of his superior, movable, yielding, but never breaking. This intense hierarchical discipline meant that even after suppression, many former Jesuits continued their quiet missions, waiting for the day they would return. That day came. Nearly half a century later, in 1814, Pope Pius VII, from the ashes of Napoleonic chaos, restored the Jesuits to full power. The Black Pope was once again seated in Rome. Since then, the Superior General has remained a figure of fascination. He does not wear a crown. He does not command armies. Yet his order continues to shape the moral and intellectual framework of the Church and, by extension, the world. From elite universities to Vatican councils, from theological debates to diplomatic channels, the Jesuit presence remains subtle, but substantial. And behind it all, the Superior General still stands, calm, composed, obscured. A shepherd with no crook, a general with no battalions, a pope with no throne, but perhaps a longer shadow. Tonight, as you rest your head and drift further into stillness, remember, not all rulers stand in light. Some reign in thought and word and influence too refined for vision, and somewhere, in the hushed halls of Rome, behind old oak doors and beneath centuries of stone, a man in black still quietly shapes the world, not seen, but never absent. Let use follow him. Into chapter 2, before the whispered name of Black Pope, before the rumors of dominion cloaked in cassock and creed, there was a man, a wounded soldier, lying in bed, his body broken, but his spirit ablaze. His name was Inigo Lopez de Onaz y Loyola, later known to the world as Ignatius of Loyola. He did not begin as a mystic. He began as a swordsman, a dreamer of chivalry, valor, and noble ambition. But fate, as it often does in stories of deep transformation, arrived not with a whisper, but with a cannonball. It was 1521. The fortress of Pamplona, nestled in the hills of northern Spain, was under siege by the French. Ignatius, proud and young, stood with the Spanish garrison. He believed in courage as though it were armor, but a single shot from French artillery shattered his leg, and with it, the life he thought he would live. As his body healed, slowly and painfully, he asked for books of knighthood and battle to pass the time. Instead, he was handed texts on the life of Christ and the saints. What began as boredom became curiosity. Curiosity became awe, and awe became surrendered. As he lay still, something deeper began to stir, something smoldering beneath the surface of ambition. In those long hours of forced stillness, Ignatius began to imagine another kind of warfare, one not of swords, but of souls, a battlefield not of flags and frontiers, but of faith, doubt, desire, and discipline. He imagined an army, not for Spain, but for God, not armored in steel, but in purpose, not bound by territory, but by obedience. He dreamed of a company of Jesus. When he could walk again, he did not return to courtly life. Instead, he began a pilgrimage to Montserrat, where he laid his sword before a statue of the Virgin Mary and traded his noble clothes for rags. From there, he journeyed through hardship, begging, praying, studying, and preparing himself for a life utterly unlike the one he had known. In the cave at Manresa, Ignatius fasted, wept, and wrote. It was here he experienced his most mystical insights, visions, temptations, and illuminations that would later form the spiritual foundation of the Jesuit order. His most enduring legacy from this time was the spiritual exercises, a method of inner purification and discernment through intense meditation, self-examination, and surrender. But it wasn't just about faith. It was about discipline, structure, control of the self, and through it, influence over others. The fire within Ignatius was no longer personal ambition. It had become spiritual command. He understood the power of hierarchy, the need for absolute clarity of mission, the value of a chain of obedience. These were principles he once used to serve his king, and now he would use them to serve something even greater. And so, with quiet patience, he gathered a small group of companion students from the University of Paris, among them Francis Xavier, Peter Faber, and others who would one day walk among emperors, kings, and pagodas alike. Together in 1534, they took vows of poverty and chastity, dedicating themselves to a life of apostolic work under the guidance of the Church. But the Church did not yet know what it was accepting. In 1540, Pope Paul III officially recognized their brotherhood as the Society of Jesus. It was unlike any other order. Jesuits were not bound to monasteries or cloisters. They were free to travel, free to teach, free to embed themselves in society. So long as they obeyed, and at the helm of this strange new vessel stood Ignatius, the first superior general. He chose the title carefully. He did not see himself as an abbot or a bishop. He saw himself as a commander, but one who fought not with armies, but with insight, knowledge, persuasion, and strategy. From the very beginning, Loyola's structure for the Jesuits was military in tone, but spiritual in intent. Every Jesuit would be trained intellectually and emotionally to carry out the mission. They would be thinkers, teachers, confessors, diplomats, missionaries, and in all things deeply loyal. Obedience was not optional. It was sacred, not only to the Church, but to the superior general. This is where the world first began to take uneasy notice. Who was this man in black, who wielded such discipline and influence over thousands of brilliant minds? How much of their loyalty went to Rome, and how much to him? Loyola's secret flame was not mere faith. It was something more exacting, a belief in ordered transformation, in molding men not through fear, but through structure, trust, and shared divine vision. And because of that flame, the Jesuits quickly became more than missionaries. They became a network. Within a few decades, they had founded colleges across Europe, entered royal courts, translated ancient texts in Asia, and advised the powerful in whispers that carried more weight than gold. This was not accidental. It was designed, and the man who designed it, who envisioned the entire framework, while lying broken and alone, was still at the helm, writing letters, issuing orders, revising strategy. His health was failing, but his mind remained sharp. His final years were marked by correspondence. Over 7,000 letters survive, each one a piece of guidance, correction, or encouragement, each one a strand in a growing invisible web. When he died in 1556, Ignatius of Loyola was not canonized immediately. His influence was still too new, his strategies still too mysterious. But his legacy endured. Within a century, the Jesuits had become the most powerful order in Catholicism, revered, feared, imitated, and distrusted, and the office he created, Superior General, remained intact, passed from man to man across centuries like a key to an invisible vault, a vault not of treasure, but of power. Tonight, as you lie in stillness, let your thoughts drift to that soldier turned saint, the man who once sought glory on a battlefield only to find a higher war within. Let your mind rest on the quiet truth that some of history's most enduring flames are lit not in moments of triumph, but in pain, in silence, in solitude. And from one man's dark night of the soul came a dawn that would stretch into centuries. Let us follow its light into chapter 3. In candlelit chapels and hidden chambers across centuries, men knelt, not before crowns, nor before riches, but before something far more demanding, a vow. In the stillness of consecrated silence, Jesuits offered their will, their voice, their very identity to the mission of the Society of Jesus. But this was no ordinary oath. It was layered, unwavering, and, to some, unsettling. It asked for the obedience of a soldier, the silence of a shadow, and the resolve of a martyr. And at its heart was loyalty, not just to God, nor only to the Church, but to a single man cloaked in black, the Superior General. It was this vow, spoken softly and sealed in sacred intention, that made the Jesuit order both revered and feared, because an empire built on faith may be vast, but an empire built on obedience can be silent, flexible, and nearly invisible. The Jesuit oath was structured in tiers, each level deepening one's commitment to the society. The first vows were those of poverty, chastity, and obedience, standard among religious orders. But these, for the Jesuits, were merely the threshold. It was the final profession, the fourth vow that gave the society its unique power structure. This vow, taken only by select members deemed spiritually and intellectually elite, was one of special obedience to the Pope regarding mission work. But in practice, it meant something even more precise, that the Jesuit, having surrendered his life, would go anywhere, do anything, speak to anyone the Pope commanded. No hesitation, no resistance, no delay. This radical obedience was not born of naivete, but of design. Ignatius of Loyola had studied both the military and monastic mind. He knew that if one wished to move with divine speed, one needed unity, not the consensus of the many, but the willful surrender of the few. And so, Jesuits were trained not only in theology, philosophy, and languages, but in interior mastery. They were taught how to discipline thought, regulate emotion, and listen beyond the noise of self. The spiritual exercises which formed the backbone of Jesuit formation were not passive devotions. They were spiritual drills methods of interior conquest. Thus, when a Jesuit took his vows, he did not merely join a religious order. He entered a system of formation as deep as any military academy, as subtle as any intelligence network, and as sacred as any holy rite. But with such rigorous loyalty came fear from the outside. Rulers wondered if a Jesuit owed more loyalty to his general and to the Pope than to his king. Could he ever be trusted in the court? Could a man trained in subtlety, logic, and persuasion wield such gifts without manipulating the very soul of a nation? Whispers of unease turned to accusations. Jesuits were called infiltrators, manipulators, puppeteers in priestly robes. There, secrecy, though rooted in humility and discipline, became the source of suspicion. And the oath, the very source of their strength, became the center of myth. By the 17th century, rumors had begun to circulate across Protestant Europe and even within Catholic courts. Pamphlets, speeches, and secret letters alleged that Jesuits took blood oaths, swearing vengeance on heretics, promising to deceive, manipulate, and even assassinate for the good of Rome. These allegations, though largely fictitious, took root in the anxious soil of political paranoia. It is often the case that the more disciplined a group becomes, the more easily its discipline is mistaken for conspiracy. What was clear is that the Jesuit vow of obedience created a hierarchy unlike any other. At its peak stood the superior general, whose directives echoed across continents and languages. Though many Jesuits would never see his face, they moved by his word. In this way, the Society of Jesus became what some have called a silent empire, its territory not marked by borders, but by minds and missions. Its allegiance flowed through prayer and Papacy alike. The power of the vow was not in compulsion, but in consent. Jesuits chose this path. They entered with eyes wide, hearts humbled, and intellects sharpened. The obedience was not blind in the sense of ignorance. It was blind in trust. Trust that the chain of command led ultimately to divine purpose. It is this concept, voluntary, total surrender to a higher good, that modern minds often find most difficult to grasp. In an age built on personal freedom, such obedience feels alien, even dangerous. And yet, this very surrender allowed the Jesuits to act with a precision and unity unmatched in church history. One mind, one will, one purpose. Within this framework, the Black Pope, the Superior General, stood as both shepherd and strategist. He was not charismatic in the traditional sense. He did not hold mass rallies nor wield open political sway. His power was subtle, rooted in the structure beneath him. His orders were quiet, carried by couriers, by letters, by faithful men trained to hear not just words, but intention. This is how empires move in the dark, soft-footed, prayer-bound, and deliberate, and this is why the oath matters, not because it was sinister, but because it was binding inwardly, absolutely, without spectacle. To this day, the vow remains. Modern Jesuits still take the fourth vow, still surrender themselves to a higher command. But the meaning of that obedience has shifted with time. It no longer inspires political panic, but it still draws curiosity. Why would a man of learning, of reason, of independence, give up his will? The answer is not found in logic alone. It is found in the still, small places of the human heart, where devotion outweighs ambition and duty becomes sacred. It is found in the spaces where silence holds more power than speech. And so tonight, as the world falls quiet around you, imagine those thousands of footsteps across centuries, men kneeling, whispering vows not for glory or gain, but for something deeper. Something unseen, something unwavering, and above them all, always the Black Pope listening, not for applause, but for alignment. A commander not of armies, but of souls shaped in silence. Drift now into that silence. Let your thoughts move like incense, curling through sacred halls and hidden vows, and in that stillness prepare to walk further into Chapter 4, beneath the glittering dome of St. Peter's Basilica, where pilgrims gather in daylight and candlelight. An unseen force has long woven threads of influence through the heart of Rome. It is neither the white-robed Pope, whose face is seen by millions, nor the cardinals who debate loudly behind closed doors. Instead, it is a man cloaked in black, quiet, reserved, and wielding a power felt rather than flaunted, the superior general of the Society of Jesus. He is often called the Black Pope, not as an official title, but as a whispered acknowledgment of the paradox he embodies. For he is a man who serves the Pope, but also guides him. He is subordinate, yet sovereign. He is hidden in plain sight, a shadow cast long across the eternal city. This chapter unravels the subtle dominion of this figure, the ways his influence pulses quietly through the veins of the Vatican and beyond. The role of the superior general is unlike any other in the Catholic Church. Though he answers to the Pope, his authority over the Jesuits, an order of thousands spread across continents, nearly absolute. Unlike bishops tied to dioceses or cardinals, often tied to politics, the superior general commands a global network, unified by purpose and obedience. He is a strategist of faith, an orchestrator of missions, a keeper of secrets. Historically, the Jesuits have been advisors to monarchs, confessors to rulers, and educators of princes. Their reach extended beyond churches and monasteries into courts and kingdoms, and their superior general was the quiet conductor, moving pieces on a board few could see. In times of crisis, such as the Counter-Reformation, the Jesuits became the Church's intellectual warriors, defending doctrine, founding universities, and advancing science and scholarship. Behind their success was always the guiding hand of the general, whose letters directed strategy, assigned envoys, and ensured unity. This silent puppeteer was not interested in spectacle. He wielded power like a still pool, deep and steady rather than rushing and loud. His influence was not in public decrees, but in private counsel. He shaped doctrine not by edict, but by guiding theologians and bishops. He influenced diplomacy not through armies, but through words and wisdom. Over centuries, rumors swirled about the true power of the Black Pope. Some whispered he was the real Pope, pulling strings unseen. Others feared him as a master manipulator, directing world events from shadowed corridors. Yet, the reality is more nuanced. The superior general's power is rooted in obedience, network, and intellect. He does not command armies, but he commands minds. He does not rule lands, but he shapes beliefs. His dominion is not of territory, but of trust. This trust is cultivated through an unbroken tradition of education and formation. Jesuit schools from Europe to the Americas, Asia to Africa have produced thinkers, leaders, and influencers. The general's hand touches these institutions, guiding curriculum and inspiring a worldview centered on service, justice, and contemplation. Through education, the society subtly molds future generations of power holders, diplomats, and scholars. Diplomacy is another thread in this silent web. Jesuits have long served as unofficial emissaries, mediators, and advisors in political and religious negotiations. The Superior General's decisions can ripple across courts and congresses, influencing peace treaties and religious tolerance. This influence is not wielded openly, but through discretion and relationships throughout history. The Vatican itself has been a complex dance of power between popes, cardinals, monarchies, and nations. The Superior General stands apart yet at the center, a constant in the flux. When popes change, when politics shift, the General remains a steady, guiding force. He is the calm in Rome's eternal storm. Tonight, as you lie enveloped in quiet, imagine the Black Pope's presence, a silent pulse beneath the grandeur of the Vatican. He is not a figure of loud authority, but of measured grace, a keeper of continuity, a steward of influence, and a guardian of secrets. He is a man who walks the narrow line between servant and sovereign, carrying a mantle of quiet dominion, and as your thoughts drift like a gentle breeze through ancient halls and whispering shadows, remember, sometimes the deepest power is not seen but felt, not declared but lived, not wielded but entrusted. The Black Pope remains a mystery folded in black velvet, a shadow cast in holy light, and a story still unfolding. Let your mind rest in this quiet understanding, and when you awaken in dreams, carry with you the knowledge of Rome's silent puppet master. Prepare now for Chapter 5, where the web of Jesuit influence stretches even further, across oceans and empires as the sun dipped below the horizon of 16th century Europe. A quiet fleet set sail not to conquer lands with cannon and sword, but to claim hearts and minds across oceans vast and unknown. The Jesuits, under the watchful guidance of their Superior General, embarked on a voyage that would stretch the reach of the Black Pope far beyond the marble halls of Rome, into the dense jungles of the Americas, the bustling ports of Asia, and the mysterious temples of the East. This was a journey not just of geography, but of spirit, one that would weave the society of Jesus into the fabric of empires and cultures across the world. The age of discovery was also an age of religious expansion. As European powers charted new territories, the Church saw opportunity and challenge. The Jesuits, with their unmatched discipline and zeal, were uniquely suited to this calling. They were not merely missionaries. They were diplomats, scholars, linguists, and cultural bridges. Their Superior General, seated in Rome, directed these far-flung missions with an attentive hand. Letters crossed oceans, carrying instructions, encouragement, and the weight of sacred trust. In 1541, St. Francis Xavier, one of Ignatius's first companions, reached the shores of India, then later Japan. His letters back to Rome described a world both foreign and fascinating, where languages were puzzles, customs were mysteries, and faith had to be sown delicately. Xavier's approach was humble and adaptive. He learned languages, respected local customs, and sought to build bridges rather than walls. This was a new model of missionary work, one of enculturation rather than conquest. Across the Atlantic, Jesuits landed in the Americas, where indigenous Peoples greeted them with curiosity and caution. Jesuit missionaries founded schools, learned native languages, and recorded cultures at risk of vanishing beneath the tides of colonization. Their missions were often small, isolated, yet profoundly transformative. Through education and spiritual guidance, the Jesuits became entwined with the fates of empires rising and falling. This global network was unlike anything seen before. The Superior General was the unseen helmsman, guiding these endeavors with precision and care. His orders were delivered through trusted envoys and written correspondence, weaving a tapestry of mission and influence. Each mission, though distant, was a thread in the greater fabric of Jesuit purpose, an extension of Rome's quiet power. Black Pope's dominion was not territorial, but relational. He ruled by connection and commitment rather than borders. The Society of Jesus became a transcontinental body, a spiritual body with limbs stretching to every corner of the known world. The Jesuits' knowledge of cultures, languages, and politics made them indispensable to both church and crown. They often served as advisors to monarchs and intermediaries in conflicts, their word carrying subtle weight. Yet with expansion came complexity. Jesuit missions were sometimes caught between colonial ambitions and indigenous rights, between faith and politics. The Superior General navigated these tensions with care, balancing obedience to Rome with sensitivity to local realities. The shadow of the Black Pope stretched long, touching lives unknown and places unseen, forever altering the course of history. Tonight, as you close your eyes and drift, picture the ships crossing dark waters under star-studded skies. Imagine the voices of Jesuits whispering prayers in unknown tongues, their footsteps soft on foreign soil. Feel the quiet pulse of a mission that is both sacred and worldly, intimate and vast. The Black Pope's reach is not marked by flags or fortresses, but by hearts opened and lives transformed. Rest now, carried gently by the currents of history and faith. Let the story of the Jesuit voyages settle like a lullaby in your mind, a testament to a power both humble and enduring. And as you slip deeper into sleep, prepare for Chapter 6, where the Black Pope's influence weaves through the courts and intrigues of Europe, a game of shadows and whispers in the grand halls of Europe's royal courts, where chandeliers gleamed and tapestries whispered tales of conquest. Another kind of power moved quietly through corridors less illuminated. It was a power of counsel, persuasion, and subtlety, the power of Jesuit advisors, scholars, and confessors who, under the watchful gaze of the Superior General, became invisible architects of influence. While kings and queens wore crowns and wielded swords, the Jesuits carried pens, books, and whispered prayers. Their presence in royal chambers was both honored and feared, for they held a curious kind of sway not over armies or riches, but over the very thoughts of rulers. From the courts of France to the palaces of Spain, Jesuit confessors became trusted confidants to monarchs. These spiritual guides offered solace, direction, and occasionally counsel that shaped decisions of war and peace. Their influence was subtle, never overt, and often hidden beneath layers of etiquette and devotion. The Superior General, seated in Rome, orchestrated this network with care, aware that such influence could be both a blessing and a peril. Jesuits were not mere spiritual advisors. They were intellectual powerhouses, versed in philosophy, theology, and the sciences. Their education was rigorous, their discipline unyielding. This made them valuable in courts where knowledge was currency and ideas were weapons. They crafted arguments that could sway policies, wrote treatises that influenced laws, and negotiated peace where swords had failed. Their mission was to serve both God and king, a delicate balance often fraught with tension. Yet, with great influence came suspicion. Monarchs and nobles, wary of the Jesuits' loyalty, questioned where their allegiance truly lay, with the Pope or the crown. Rumors spread of Jesuits as shadowy manipulators, puppeteers pulling strings behind velvet curtains. These whispers fed the myth of the Black Pope, the superior general, as the unseen hand, guiding not only the Church but the fate of nations. The Jesuits' role in political intrigues was never public, but often pivotal. They mediated disputes between rival factions, advised on religious tolerance in volatiles, and at times served as secret envoys in delicate negotiations. Their ability to navigate the complexities of court life was unmatched. Their discretion, legendary. Despite suspicions, many rulers recognized the value of Jesuit counsel. Their dedication, intellect, and loyalty made them indispensable. The superior general's directives ensured that Jesuits remained disciplined and unified, even as they adapted to the unique challenges of each court. Through these channels, the Black Pope's influence rippled across Europe, shaping events without ever stepping into the light. Tonight, as the world outside grows hushed, imagine those shadowed courts filled with murmured conversations, the soft rustle of silk, and the quiet presence of Jesuit advisers. Picture the superior general watching from afar, his power woven through these whispered moments. His dominion is not a throne, but a tapestry of trust and subtlety. Let your thoughts drift gently through these silent chambers, where history's quiet architects shape the destiny of kings and nations. In this stillness, find peace in the knowledge that true power often moves in whispers, not shouts. Prepare now for Chapter 7, where the Black Pope's reach touches the forbidden world of secret knowledge and hidden books. In the quiet, vaulted libraries tucked away beneath Rome's ancient streets, the scent of aged parchment mingles softly with the fading candlelight. Here, within rows of leather-bound tomes and manuscripts, the Jesuits have long stood as custodians, not only of revealed truth, but of knowledge that history sought to conceal or forget. The Society of Jesus, under the guidance of the superior general, the Black Pope, became silent, guardians of books and ideas that could unsettle empires and challenge the very foundations of faith. These libraries were more than repositories. They were sanctuaries of thought, places where forbidden knowledge was preserved, studied, and carefully guarded. The Jesuits, trained in rigorous scholarship and spiritual discipline, approached such works not as rebels, but as stewards, believing that knowledge, even when dangerous, must be held with reverence and care. The shadows of the Inquisition loomed over Rome's intellectual life, yet the Jesuits walked a narrow path. While publicly defending doctrine, they quietly collected and studied works from across the spectrum: scientific treatises, mystical writings, and ancient philosophies. Their scholarship often pushed boundaries, probing mysteries others feared. This paradox, the faithful scholar who nurtures the forbidden, gave rise to whispered rumors and legends. Were the Jesuits keepers of secrets too potent for common eyes? Did the Black Pope wield knowledge that placed him beyond mortal power? Among the treasures under Jesuit care were manuscripts on alchemy, ancient texts on lost civilizations, and philosophical works that blended faith and reason. The Society's schools became centers of learning that preserved these texts, teaching generations of students to seek truth beneath layers of dogma and politics. The Superior General's role was vital, ensuring these collections were protected. Their study aligned with the Order's spiritual mission. The balance was delicate. Too much curiosity could invite suspicion. Too much secrecy could breed fear. Jesuits thus developed a culture of discretion, sharing knowledge carefully and selectively, always mindful of the consequences. Their libraries became places where history's mysteries were not erased, but whispered across the pages. This guardianship extended beyond Rome. Jesuit missionaries carried rare books to far-flung lands, translating and adapting knowledge to new cultures. In doing so, they became conduits of a hidden intellectual lineage that transcended borders and centuries. The Black Pope's influence, then, was not only spiritual or political, but profoundly intellectual. Tonight, as you lie still in the soft darkness, imagine the quiet turning of pages in these ancient rooms, the dim glow of candlelight, illuminating texts written centuries ago. Picture Jesuit scholars poring over mysteries that hum beneath the surface of history. Feel the weight of knowledge, both a gift and a responsibility held with gentle hands. Let your thoughts drift like slow ink on parchment, tracing the delicate lines where faith meets curiosity. In this space, the Black Pope watches not as a tyrant of secrets, but as a careful guardian, a silent protector of hidden truths. And as you fall deeper into sleep, prepare to journey next into Chapter 8, where the shadows of conspiracy and devotion entwine in a dance as old as Rome itself. There are few things more unsettling to kings than the presence of quiet power that does not boast, does not march, and does not beg. In the lavish palaces of 17th and 18th century Europe, where velvet curtains muffled the sounds of fear, the Jesuits walked softly. They carried no sword. Yet monarchs began to suspect they carried something far more dangerous: loyalty to a man who was not the king. And so an unease began to bloom in the hearts of rulers, a soft anxiety that whispered behind their gilded thrones. Who truly governs the minds of men? Jesuit influence had grown quietly for centuries, woven through the corridors of European courts. They were confessors to emperors, tutors to princes, and the ghostwriters of theological arguments that buttressed royal authority. Yet their true allegiance to their superior general in Rome made monarchs restless. What if, they asked, a kingdom's most trusted adviser followed the will of another? What if the Black Pope, hidden from public view, could whisper commands? Across borders, oceans, and crowns, in Spain, in France, and Portugal, rulers began to glance over their shoulders. The Jesuits' reputation for obedience, discipline, and intellectual supremacy had once made them invaluable. Now those very traits stirred suspicion. Their global reach across schools, missions, and diplomatic channels looked less like spiritual devotion and more like a network. The Society of Jesus, it seemed, was not merely a religious order. It was a silent empire, and at its center, a man in black whose name few commoners even knew. Tensions began to rise. In France, the Enlightenment had birthed a new age of skepticism. Philosophers like Voltaire railed against the Jesuits, accusing them of manipulating rulers and hiding behind veils of piety. Political pamphlets painted them as master puppeteers, steering both church and state with invisible strings. In Spain and Portugal, the situation turned more dangerous. Accusations flew of economic manipulation, of meddling in colonial affairs, of secretly directing uprisings in South America. The Jesuits, many claimed, were more loyal to Rome than to the realm, and where loyalty falters in the eyes of kings. Exile soon follows in 1759. The Portuguese Prime Minister, the Marquis of Pombal, ordered the expulsion of the Jesuits from all Portuguese territories. Overnight, churches and schools were closed. Priests were arrested. Missions in Brazil and India were dismantled. France followed in 1764. Spain in 1767. Austria soon after. Within a decade, most of Catholic Europe had turned against the Jesuits. And though the Church still protected them, the pressure was mounting. Monarchs demanded their suppression. And in 1773, Pope Clement XIV, caught in a vice between royal power and ecclesiastical loyalty, issued a fateful decree, Dominus AC Redemptor. The Society of Jesus was formally suppressed. Its properties were seized, its members scattered. Its mission halted. The Black Pope then, Superior General Lorenzo Ricci, was arrested and imprisoned in Castel Sant'Angelo in Rome. He died there quietly, without trial. And with him, it seemed, died the invisible reign of the man in black. But not all shadows fade with time, and not all silence is surrender. Even as their name was erased from legal documents, the Jesuit spirit lived on in quiet corners of Eastern Europe, in whispered prayers in China, in the minds of those trained to obey with love and think with rigor. And though the crown had seemingly won, it had not understood. For the Black Pope's strength was never built on title or force, it was built on belief. And belief, once planted in soil deep enough, grows back with time. Tonight, as your thoughts begin to soften and slow, imagine a candlelit chamber in a royal palace, a king seated, head bowed, asking advice of a man in black. Now imagine that same king years later signing a decree of exile, afraid of the very voice he once trusted. What changed? Was it the Jesuit, or the king's fear of what could not be controlled? Let these questions drift gently through your thoughts. Let them rest, unanswered like old dust on worn stone, and prepare, as the society begins to rise once more, in the quiet morning after the long storm. Let us move forward now to chapter 9, where the power that once was scattered returns. In the heart of Rome, where basilicas rise like hymns in stone and saints sleep beneath marble floors, a heavy silence once fell. It was the silence of a church at war with itself, not with swords or schisms, but with unease, pressure, and the unbearable weight of power veiled in black. In the year 1773, that silence broke not with thunder, but with parchment, and ink, and a trembling papal hand. The document was titled Dominus AC Redemptor. The act was the suppression of the Jesuit order, and the man who signed it, Pope Clement XIV, would carry its burden to his final breath. Clement XIV, born Lorenzo Ganganelli, was a Franciscan friar before he wore the white, a scholar moderate in temperament, and deeply aware of the tensions swelling beneath the Church's polished surface. When he was elected Pope in 1769, The throne he inherited was not just holy, it was cornered. By that time, Europe's monarchs had declared open hostility to the Society of Jesus. Portugal, Spain, France, Naples, all had expelled the Jesuits from their realms. Their accusation? That the Jesuits meddled in political affairs, wielded disproportionate influence, and followed the will of their general, not the Pope, and certainly not the crown. The Black Pope had become, in the eyes of kings, more dangerous than heretics. For years, Clement resisted the pressure. He was no enemy of the Jesuits, and he knew their value educators, missionaries, confessors, the intellectual backbone of Catholic resistance to Enlightenment erosion. Yet the calls grew louder. Threats were made. Political alliances strained. And always the demand was the same: dissolve the society. Break the shadow behind the throne. Clement consulted, prayed, delayed. But the pressure was relentless. Portugal threatened to sever ties with the Papacy. Spain hinted at forming a national church. France, deeply entwined with Enlightenment ideas, pushed hardest of all. Clement, 14, knew, to preserve the visible church, he might have to sacrifice its invisible strength. On July 21, 1773, after months of negotiations behind gilded doors and hours of solitary agony, the Pope signed the brief. Dominus Esse Redemptor Noster. The decree abolished the Society of Jesus. The Black Pope at that time, Lorenzo Ricci, was taken into custody. No charges. No trial, just silence. He was placed in Castel Sant'Angelo, the old fortress overlooking the Tiber, a place once meant to protect popes now used to contain their most dangerous servant. Ricci did not resist. He wrote letters, prayed, waited. 2 years later he died within its stone walls unaccused, unlamented, and largely unseen. Elsewhere, the Jesuit world collapsed. Schools were shuttered, libraries confiscated, property seized by the state or absorbed into diocesan hands. Thousands of priests, strained for obedience, mission, and scholarship, were left to scatter like ashes in the wind. In France, they were exiled. In Spain, imprisoned. In colonies abroad, many continued their work in secret, disguising their identities or blending into local clergy. But the flame did not go out. It simply dimmed, retreating into memory, waiting. Pope Clement XIV, though outwardly resolute, was inwardly haunted by his decision. Letters from that period show a man tormented by what he had done, not just politically but spiritually. He spoke of enemies growing closer, of voices in shadows, of a creeping illness that no physician could name. On September 22, 1774, little more than a year after signing the decree, Clement died. Some whispered it was poison. Others said it was guilt. The truth, as always, settled somewhere in the stillness between those stories, but history, as it often does, held more than one script. Even as the Jesuits were torn from power, their presence lingered. In Russia, where the papal decree was never fully enforced, Jesuits continued their work with the quiet blessing of Catherine the Great. In parts of Prussia, they taught under assumed names. In the Americas and the East, old missions quietly lived on, their founders long gone, but their legacy planted deep. The Black Pope's throne sat empty, but not forgotten. Within the Vatican, time passed. New popes came, the world changed. Revolutions ignited, monarchies fell. The Enlightenment, once held at bay, swept through Europe like a wind through old curtains. But beneath it all, in silence, the Society of Jesus was remembered, not with celebration, not with ceremony, but with a sense of something unfinished. Tonight, as your thoughts grow slow and the world fades to dim, imagine the inner chambers of the Vatican in that restless year. Picture the trembling hands of a pope, torn between the seen and the unseen. Hear the echo of silent steps across stone floors, the absence of voices once strong in the halls of learning and devotion. Let yourself drift into that pause in history, the breath held before the resurrection. For though the society had fallen, its story had not ended. The Black Pope had been silenced, but only for a time. Let us now move into chapter 10, where embers stir in the ashes, and Rome hears again the whisper of black robes returning. History has a way of circling back, quietly, gently, like water returning to a once dry well. And so it was nearly 41 years after their suppression that the Jesuits, once scattered, shamed, and silenced, were called back into the fold. Not with trumpets, not with parade, but with a soft papal decree and the hush of candlelight. Behind Vatican doors, it was 1814, a year marked by the collapse of empires and the reshuffling of the world. And while the crowns of Europe tilted and toppled, Rome remembered. Pope Pius VII, weary from years of imprisonment under Napoleon and newly returned to his fractured seat in the Vatican, saw what others had tried to erase. He saw a church weakened by war, enlightenment, and exile. He saw empty schools, broken missions, and spiritual confusion. And in that silence he heard an old name, the Society of Jesus. They had been exiled, but they had not vanished. They had been condemned, but not forgotten. And in some corners of the world, they had never truly left. In Russia, Empress Catherine the Great, ever skeptical of papal overreach, had refused to promulgate the suppression decree. She valued the Jesuits not for their religion, but for their reason. Their schools were among the finest in her empire, and she protected them as one might protect a rare, cultivated seed. Likewise, in parts of Prussia, Jesuits remained quietly active, ministering under aliases, maintaining the old disciplines in hidden seminaries. They had become ghosts of their former selves, but intact, waiting, watching, remembering. In 1801, Pope Pius VII had cautiously allowed their continuation in Russia, acknowledging what was already fact. The society had survived underground, but it was not until August 7, 1814, that the full resurrection was declared. In the document titled Solicitudo Omnium Ecclesiarum, the care of all churches Pius formally restored the Society of Jesus to its former rights and privileges. It was an act of reconciliation, an act of quiet courage, and for many, an act of necessity. The Black Pope returned. Father Tadeusz Brzozowski, a Polish Jesuit who had quietly maintained the order in Russia, became the new Superior General. His office, long empty, long watched, was reawakened. And though he would never leave Russian soil before his death, his voice echoed across the order once more. Letters were sent. Old missions reopened, schools repaired, brothers reconnected. The silent resurrection had begun. Where silence lingers too long, imagination fills the void. And where power moves quietly, suspicion grows louder. For centuries the Jesuits have lived in this tension, between admiration and accusation, between reverence and rumored dot. They were builders of schools, defenders of the poor, scholars of vast intellect. But to others they were the whispered villains, in smoky taverns and ink-stained pamphlets, invisible manipulators, secret rulers, priests with a second face. And at the center of these stories, real or imagined, stood the Black Pope, cloaked not only in cassock, but in myth. The Society of Jesus has always been difficult to pin down. Their loyalty is fierce, but flexible. Their missions global, but tightly coordinated. Their vows absolute, yet made in secrecy. They answer not to local bishops, but to their superior general. And he, in turn, whispers only to Rome. To some, this model was genius. To others, it was deeply unsettling. The first wave of suspicion began in the 17th century, as Protestant Europe grew wary of Catholic resurgence. Jesuits were painted as Rome's elite infiltrators, subtle persuaders who could twist a monarch's ear or bend public policy from behind the scenes. In England, during the infamous Popish plot of 1678, fabricated tales of Jesuits conspiring to assassinate King Charles II led to executions and public hysteria. There was no plot, but the fear lingered. Why? Because the Jesuits, unlike monks or friars, lived among the people. They debated in universities, advised the elite, and moved in plain sight. And because they were so well educated, so articulate, so loyal, they were seen not just as holy men, but as operatives. Throughout the enlightened, thinkers like Voltaire and Diderot targeted the Jesuits as obstacles to reason and freedom. Even as Jesuit schools turned out some of Europe's brightest minds, anti-Jesuit pamphlets flourished in back alleys and courtrooms. They were accused of everything from manipulating kings to orchestrating wars. Later, in revolutionary France, whispers return with sharpened teeth. Jesuits were blamed for influencing Napoleon, for staging counter-revolutions, for maintaining shadow governments within governments. Their actual involvement was rarely proven, but as always, absence of evidence became evidence of control. By the 19th and 20th centuries, as conspiracy theories evolved, the Jesuits became staple characters in the shadow plays of modern fear. In Protestant America, fringe publications warned of a Vatican plot to subvert democracy. Jesuits, it was claimed, were laying the groundwork for a papal takeover, educating elite youth, influencing legislation, building a secret religious state within the Republic. A popular 19th century anti-Catholic novel, The Awful Disclosures, of Maria Monk, fabricated horrifying tales of Jesuit-controlled nunneries. It sold tens of thousands of copies. Though entirely fictional, its images fed a fire already smoldering in the minds of the anxious. Even today, in the digital age, the name of the Black Pope is invoked in conspiracy forums and fringe documentaries. He is said to lead the true world. Order to command banks and media outlets, to steer elections and global institutions. In this narrative, the White Pope is merely ceremonial, a figurehead, while the real control lies in the hands of a hidden general. These theories weave together truth and fantasy. Yes, the superior general leads a global order. Yes, Jesuits have shaped policy and trained leaders, but control is not the same as conspiracy. Still, the mystery persists, and mystery, in times of fear, often becomes myth. Why the fixation? Because the Jesuits, unlike many other religious groups, defy simple categorization. They are both spiritual and strategic, visible and hidden, obedient and influential. They thrive in nuance, in complexity, and in a world that craves clarity. That very complexity invites suspicion. The Jesuits make an easy villain because they are hard to understand. And yet, in the shadows of these rumors, the real story continues. Jesuits teach in refugee camps. They minister in prisons. They translate ancient texts. They run schools in the poorest neighborhoods of the richest cities. The Black Pope does not sit in a dark chamber pulling strings. He sits in Rome, writing letters of encouragement, discerning vocations, responding to crises. He oversees not as a sovereign, but as a servant, and in his humility the myth falls apart. But myths are stubborn things. Tonight, as you lie beneath soft blankets and the room darkens, imagine a world where fiction curls at the edge of truth. Picture an old library, its corners filled with dust and rumor. A candle flickers. A manuscript lies open, half history, half legend. You step closer. You read. You wonder. Because sometimes we want mystery more than we want answers. We crave the shadows because they make the light more interesting. Let your thoughts drift gently there, between what was whispered and what was real. Let the rumors fade like smoke through chapel rafters, and when you wake, let your heart remember that. The deepest truths are rarely loud. As we step into chapter 17, we turn now to a deeper, stranger loyalty, one not just to God, not just to Rome, but to a single vow that has haunted the Society's legends for centuries. In the quiet corridors of Jesuit history, there lies a vow unlike any other, known simply as the fourth vow. It transcends the three traditional vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. This vow is a pledge of absolute loyalty, one that binds a Jesuit not only to the Society of Jesus, but in the most profound way to the Pope himself. It is a vow whispered in shadows, sometimes misunderstood, often feared. A commitment that has fueled speculation about Jesuit influence and power. And yet within it lies a paradox, a vow of total submission, wrapped in the paradox of radical freedom. The term Third Rome emerges in this chapter's title with quiet resonance. It is a concept steeped in history, myth, and spiritual symbolism. Following the fall of Rome and Constantinople, the idea of a Third Rome was claimed by Moscow, a new center of Orthodox Christian authority. Yet within the Catholic imagination, Rome itself remains eternal, and the Papacy, the visible sign of Christ's presence on earth. For Jesuits, the Third Rome is less a geographical claim than a metaphor, a spiritual reality. It is the idea that the true power of the Church does not lie in palaces or armies, but in obedience and mission. The Jesuit fourth vow is the linchpin of this understanding, tying the order directly to the papal mission with an almost sacred fidelity. This vow was formally instituted by St. Ignatius Loyola when he founded the Society of Jesus in 1540. Unlike other religious orders, Jesuits take an additional promise to go wherever the Pope sends them, without question, for the sake of the Church's mission. It is a vow that requires a heart unburdened by earthly ambition, free to serve the needs of the Church, even when those demands lead to hardship, exile, or danger. This vow gives the superior general a unique role acting as the Pope's instrument, moving Jesuits across continents and cultures with a purpose beyond politics or personal gain. Yet, this total loyalty has a dual edge to outsiders. It sometimes appears as secretive control, a shadow chain linking Jesuits to the Vatican's deepest strategies. To insiders, it is a source of deep spiritual freedom, a surrender that opens the way for true service. Jesuits do not serve the Pope to gain power. They serve to lose themselves in mission. Their obedience is not about domination, but about faithful presence. Throughout history, this fourth vow has taken many forms and practice. Jesuits have been sent to the farthest reaches of the globe, sometimes to hostile lands, sometimes into political upheaval. Their commitment to this vow led them into prisons, palaces, universities, and wilderness alike. It has inspired courage and sacrifice. It has also provoked suspicion and fear. For some critics, the fourth vow fuels the narrative of Jesuits as puppeteers pulling Vatican strings. For others, it is simply misunderstood, a spiritual discipline that mirrors the deepest Christian call to obedience and humility. Within the order, the vow is less a tool of power than a call to holy availability, a readiness to be shaped by the mission of the Church, no matter where it leads. Tonight, imagine this vow as a quiet thread woven through centuries of Jesuit life. Picture a young novice kneeling in prayer, pledging his life not to earthly kingdoms, but to a divine mission that transcends borders and politics. Feel the paradox. In surrender, there is strength. In obedience, there is freedom. In loyalty, there is service. As you rest beneath the soft veil of night, let the fourth vow settle gently in your mind, not as a mystery to unravel, but as a quiet truth, a reminder that the deepest bonds often lie beneath the surface, unseen but unbroken. And as this chapter closes, we prepare to follow Jesuits not only through vows and missions, but into the corridors of power where faith and politics intertwine in unexpected ways. In the quiet sanctuaries of Jesuit schools, long before the bell rings and the lesson begins, something deeper is already at work. It's not simply the recitation of facts or the mastery of language. It's the shaping of the soul, the gentle, deliberate forming of conscience, compassion, and clarity. This is the hidden curriculum of Jesuit education, a method refined across 5 centuries, stretching from the quiet hills of 16th century Rome to the urban sprawl of modern metropolises. From one generation to the next, the Jesuits have taught not only what to think, but how to think with depth, with discipline, and with discernment. And behind every classroom, every syllabi, every footstep on polished school floors, the Black Pope watches not as a shadowy ruler, but as a steady guardian of an ancient intellectual tradition. The Jesuit school is a place of paradox, at once deeply Catholic, yet welcoming to those of all beliefs, rooted in tradition yet boldly modern, rigid in structure, yet endlessly adaptive. It is a space where philosophy walks hand in hand with poetry, where mathematics shares breath with mysticism, where ethics is taught, not as abstract law, but as lived responsibility. The foundation of this educational model was laid down by Ignatius of Loyola himself in his Ratio Studiorum, a blueprint for teaching the whole person, cura personalis. This phrase, meaning care for the entire person, became a guiding light in every Jesuit classroom. Students were not to be filled like vessels, but drawn out like deep wells. The goal was never mere knowledge, but wisdom. Not mere literacy, but literacy of the heart. Throughout history, Jesuit institutions have educated kings and cardinals, poets and presidents. Their alumni include artists, saints, scientists, revolutionaries, and spiritual seekers. In each, the imprint is the same: the ability to think critically, feel deeply, and act justly. But education, in Jesuit hands, is not neutral. It is moral formation. And in this lies the power and the quiet controversy of their schools. Because to shape a mind is to shape a future, and to awaken conscience is to awaken a voice that may one day speak truth to power. Jesuit schools have often found themselves on the front lines of intellectual change. In the Enlightenment, they taught reason and rhetoric while defending the mystery of faith. In colonial lands, they preserved indigenous languages, even as they introduced Western thought. In modern democracies, they foster civic engagement and critique of injustice. Always, their mission remains the same: to form people for others. Yet this mission has drawn both admiration and suspicion, especially in regimes both past and present that prefer obedience without questioning, or education without conscience. The suspicion is not new. Throughout history, critics have claimed that Jesuit education plants ideological seeds that bloom into influence. Some have accused Jesuits of shaping future leaders not for service, but for silent allegiance to a hidden order. Conspiracy theories have spun classrooms into covert academies of control, but these are misunderstandings. Jesuit formation is not indoctrination. It is interrogation of self, of society, of truth. The only agenda is one of clarity, compassion, and justice. And such virtues, when lived sincerely, are often mistaken for resistance. In the modern world, Jesuit institutions span the globe: Georgetown in Washington, D.C., Loyola in Chicago, Sophia University in Tokyo, Gregorian University in Rome. Each of them unique in setting and culture, yet all echoing the same rhythm, the silent pulse of a tradition that teaches not just minds, but hearts. And above them all, beyond the daily bustle of academic life, the Superior General, the Black Pope, continues his unseen stewardship. He does not dictate lesson plans or grade exams, but his hand is there, in mission statements and ethical frameworks, in the insistence that education must serve not ego, but the world. Tonight, as your thoughts slow and settle, imagine an old classroom, a wooden desk, sunlight slanting through high windows, a chalkboard still bearing yesterday's Latin. Imagine students hunched over ancient texts, their minds stretching across centuries. Imagine a teacher pausing, not to explain a concept, but to ask, what does this mean for the world you will help build? That is Jesuit education. Not only knowledge, but awakening. Not only answers, but questions that never stop unfolding. Let your thoughts drift gently now, as if through the pages of an old Jesuit journal, quiet, inked with wisdom passed down through hands that taught not to impress, but to inspire. And as the classroom fades into sleep, we prepare to walk into a more modern mystery, into the present, where the Superior General still leads, unseen yet ever present, beneath the soaring dome of St. Peter's Basilica, in the heart of a city layered with centuries of faith, power, and mystery. There exists a quieter realm, It is not the vast piazza filled with pilgrims, or the dazzling spectacle of papal ceremonies. Instead, it is a chamber of reflection, a study of books and whispered conversations, where one man carries the weight of a hidden legacy. This man is the Superior General of the Society of Jesus, often called the Black Pope, not because of secret dominion, but because of his distinctive black clerical garb, in contrast to the white robes of the pontiff. In the corridors beneath the dome, he walks with a subtle authority, a presence felt more than seen. The Superior General's role is ancient and profound, yet often misunderstood. He is not a rival to the Pope, but a trusted collaborator, a spiritual general who directs a global network of Jesuit priests, educators, and missionaries. He moves behind the scenes, guiding an order that spans continents, cultures, and centuries. In modern Rome, this office carries both tradition and transformation. The Superior General must navigate the delicate balance between obedience to the papacy and the need to respond to a rapidly changing world. Today's Jesuit leadership confronts challenges unheard of by St. Ignatius's companions. The world is more connected, yet more divided. Faith is often private, even hidden in secular societies. The questions of justice, peace, ecology, and human dignity press urgently upon the Church. Within this context, the Superior General becomes not only a spiritual leader, but a visionary, an ambassador for the Church's mission in a world hungry for meaning. Yet, even as the Superior General embraces modernity, his role remains wrapped in centuries of ritual and symbolism. His office is both a hub of administration and a sanctuary of prayer. The black cassock he wears is a reminder of humility and service, a silent witness to the vow of obedience that underpins his authority. This paradox, the visible servant, who wields invisible influence, fuels the mystique that has long surrounded the figure. Around him swirl whispers, some grounded in fact, others woven from fear and fascination. Is he the true power behind the Vatican's throne? Or is he simply a guardian of a spiritual family devoted to faith and mission? The answer is more subtle than legend. The Superior General does hold significant sway, but it is a sway earned through wisdom, respect, and quiet leadership, not coercion or conspiracy. In recent decades, Jesuit Superiors General have brought new voices and new visions to the Church. They have championed the poor, advocated for justice, and opened dialogue with other faiths. They have navigated crises, both within the Church and in the world beyond. Their work often unfolds in confidential meetings, in correspondence that crosses oceans, in personal encounters that shape the direction of countless missions. As you rest now, imagine the quiet footsteps echoing down marble halls, the soft rustle of pages as letters are written and read, the stillness broken only by prayer, and the faint murmur of distant bells. Picture the Superior General in his study, deep in thought, humble in posture, carrying forward a legacy that is both ancient and alive. Tonight, let your thoughts linger on this figure, neither myth nor mere man, but a servant leader shaped by faith, history, and mission. Let the gentle mystery of his role ease you into deeper rest, a reminder that true power often moves quietly beneath the surface. And as this chapter closes, prepare to turn toward the concluding reflections, where history, myth, and mystery intertwine into a final whispered in the stillness after twilight. When the world softens and shadows lengthen, there is a whisper a voice carried not on the wind, but in the quiet spaces between heartbeats. It is the whisper of history, the murmur of stories half told, secrets half kept, and truth folded gently into time, as our journey through the veiled corridors of the Black Pope comes to a close. We find ourselves invited to rest not only in knowledge but in wonder, not in certainty but in the peace that comes from embracing mystery. Power is a shape-shifting thing. It dazzles and distorts, demands and defends, hides in plain sight and lurks in the shadows. Yet the deepest power is rarely loud or grasping. It is subtle, patient, often invisible. The Black Pope, the Jesuit Superior General, stands as a symbol of this quiet strength. Neither a shadowy puppeteer nor a forgotten servant, but a figure who embodies a paradox, immense responsibility carried with humility, influence wielded through service. In tracing the history of the Jesuits, we have seen an order shaped by vows, mission, and discipline. We have walked through centuries of education, diplomacy, exile, and renewal. We have glimpsed the fears and fantasies their presence has stirred fear, of hidden control, fascination with secret knowledge, suspicion born from misunderstanding. Yet beyond rumors and conspiracy, the story that remains is one of faith and fidelity. The fourth Ve, the pledge of obedience to the Pope, binds Jesuits to a mission that transcends worldly ambition. It calls them to be available, adaptable, and attentive to the needs of the Church and the world. This is not a vow that seeks power for its own sake, but a commitment to a higher purpose, a mission that often requires sacrifice, humility, and courage. The Jesuit journey is a dance between light and shadow, between influence and invisibility, between history and myth. It is a reminder that some truths resist easy telling, some stories unfold slowly like dawn, and some mysteries deepen rather than fade as we look closer. As you lie beneath the soft canopy of night, feel the quiet echoes of this story settle. In your mind, let the whispers in the silence remind you that not all power is seen, not all leadership is loud, not all truth is clear. Some truths are held gently, like a flame sheltered from the wind, illuminating softly, guiding quietly, enduring steadily through time. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, carry with you this reflection, that the greatest rulers often rule by serving, that the deepest strength lies in surrender, and that mystery, like night itself, invites us to rest, to wonder, and to dream. As the night deepens, and the stars hold their silent vigil over Rome's ancient skyline, we come to the final chapter of this journey, not as an ending, but as a gentle unfolding. Beyond the myths and the mysteries, beyond the whispers and shadows, lies an enduring legacy quietly woven into the fabric of history. The figure known as the Black Pope, the Superior General of the Society of Jesus, remains an enigma, a guardian of faith, a steward of mission, and a subtle architect of influence that stretches beyond the walls of the Vatican into the world at large. This legacy is not built on loud proclamations or grand displays. Instead, it is etched in decades of dedicated service, in the formation of minds and hearts, in the tireless pursuit of justice and truth. It is a legacy grounded in the paradox of power, that the deepest influence often flows through humility and obedience rather than through dominance. The Black Pope does not seek to rule Rome as a king might, Rather, he seeks to serve the greater mission entrusted to him, a mission shaped by history, faith, and the solemn vows of his order. Across centuries, Jesuits have moved quietly through the corridors of power and the classrooms of knowledge. They have stood at the crossroads of politics and spirituality, their footsteps echoing softly through the chambers of empires and republics alike. They have been scholars, diplomats, confessors, educators, and missionaries, roles that demand not only intelligence but wisdom, not only conviction but compassion. Tonight, as we reflect on the quiet influence of the Black Pope, we see a figure who embodies a delicate balance between tradition and innovation, between loyalty and independence, between the visible and the hidden. He stands as a reminder that leadership need not be loud to be profound, that service is a form of strength, and that faith can move mountains even when moved in silence. Let this thought linger as your breath slows and your mind begins to drift. The true rulers of Rome are not always those crowned in gold or seated on thrones, but sometimes those who serve in shadows, whose power is measured not in dominion, but in devotion. As the night deepens and the city of Rome rests beneath a blanket of stars, there are forces at work that shape the world quietly, like the steady flow of an underground river. The Jesuits, with their long history of education, diplomacy, and spiritual guidance, have often been called the silent architects of culture and society. Their influence is subtle, woven into the fabric of art, science, philosophy, and politics, threads that run through centuries, often unnoticed but never absent. From the Renaissance courts to the halls of modern universities, Jesuits have contributed not only as priests, but as scholars, artists, and advisors. Their commitment to rigorous education and intellectual inquiry has shaped the minds of kings and commoners alike. In the sciences, Jesuit astronomers mapped the stars, expanding humanity's understanding of the cosmos. In literature, Jesuit writers and poets wove faith and reason into compelling narratives that still resonate today. Yet, their impact goes beyond individual achievement. Jesuit schools and missions served as cultural bridges, places where European knowledge met indigenous wisdom, where languages blended and new ideas took root. This bridging role sometimes placed Jesuits in delicate positions, balancing respect for local cultures with the Church's missionary goals. Their legacy here is complex, marked by both enrichment and controversy. The silent architects is key. Jesuits rarely sought personal fame or political power. Instead, their influence was exercised through service, through shaping hearts and minds with patience and humility. They helped shape the moral and intellectual foundations of societies around the world, planting seeds of justice, compassion, and inquiry that continue to grow. In modern times, Jesuits remain engaged in social justice, advocating for the marginalized and fostering dialogue across divides. They use their networks not for control, but for connection, building communities rooted in empathy and understanding. This quiet influence sometimes invites suspicion, but at its core, it is a legacy of steadfast faith and dedicated service. As you rest now, picture the Jesuits as silent architects working beneath the surface of history, their hands shaping the world with care and intention, like artisans crafting a vast, unseen tapestry. And in that image find peace. For the greatest changes are often those that grow slowly gently beyond the glare of spotlight. Tonight, as your breathing slows and your mind softens, let this reflection lull you deeper into rest. True influence is quiet, steady, and humble. It moves like a river beneath stone, shaping the landscape in ways we may never fully see, but always feel. And as this chapter closes, we prepare for a final gentle farewell in the next chapter, where history meets hope and mystery becomes a lullaby. There are some stories that do not end. They simply quiet themselves like a candle at the close of evening, flickering once more before settling into gentle smoke. So it is with the tale of the Black Pope, a story that began not in thunder or fire, but in silence, and returns now to that same stillness. For though we have traced his history across continents, through empires and exiles, palaces and prisons, classrooms and cathedrals, he remains, even now, more mystery than man, a figure cloaked not just in black, but in meaning. The title, Black Pope, has long walked the line between awe and accusation. It has inspired both reverence and fear. But in truth, the man behind the myth, the superior general of the Society of Jesus, has always lived in the space between light and shadow, not to dominate, not to control, but to guide, to serve in places where power is often misunderstood, where influence flows not from command, but from quiet conviction. As the modern church continues to face its own storms, spiritual, moral, political, the role of the superior general remains unchanged in its essence. Even as the world shifts around it, he is not the master of Rome. He does not issue edicts from balconies, but he listens, he writes, he prays. And through his guidance, thousands of Jesuits go into the world, not to rule it, but to heal it. There is no crown on his head, only the weight of the vow, no throne beneath him, only the shoulders of those who came before. Yet his light remains not a sun to blind, but a candle to lead, soft, steady, silent. The Black Pope as a myth may continue to evolve, fed by curiosity, suspicion, or wonder, but the real man, the one seated quietly in Rome tonight, perhaps reading a letter from a Jesuit school in Sudan or a mission in Brazil, carries on the work that began in a cave at Manresa, where Ignatius first dreamed of setting the world ablaze with the fire of faith. That fire still burns. It is not fierce. It is faithful. And so as your body settles into rest and the rhythm of night slows your breath, think of that steady light. Think of those who have shaped history not with swords, but with service, not with noise, but with knowledge, not with crowns, but with conscience. We have followed the Black Pope across centuries, watched him rise, fall, and rise again. We have seen his footsteps across empires and through the cracks in broken kingdoms. We have felt his silence shaping worlds from behind velvet curtains and wooden desks. And now we leave him not because the story ends, but because it has worked its way into us. The last light of the Black Pope is not a farewell, but a reflection, a soft glow in the distance, a call to live too with quiet purpose, to carry a legacy not of power, but of presence. Sleep now, traveler. The journey is done, but the path goes on. And somewhere in a quiet room beneath the sky of Rome, a man in black reads by candlelight, still listening for the will of God in the hush between questions, still whispering wisdom into the corners of the world. What remains when the last bell stops ringing? When the last page is turned and the last whisper of rumor has faded into quiet, what endures beyond names and titles, beyond fears and fascination, beyond the myth of the Black Pope? What remains is the spirit, not of conspiracy, but of conviction, not of domination, but of deep, reflective purpose. And in that spirit lives a kingdom, a quiet one, without crown or scepter, built not in marble, but in memory, in minds and hearts shaped by centuries of Jesuit dedication. This kingdom cannot be mapped. It lives in the students sitting in Jesuit classrooms across the globe, questioning, wondering, hoping. It lives in the soft voices of missionaries comforting the forgotten, the exiled, the broken. It lives in books worn by time past, from hand to hand, from teacher to seeker. It lives in silence, in the kind of silence that listens more than it speaks, that waits before acting, that serves without being seen. The Jesuit order was never built to rule. It was built to respond, to go where it is needed, to ask better questions, to look for God in all things. And yet it has held power, not the power of armies or of thrones, but the quieter power of formation, of shaping lives in stillness and service, of training the minds that would lead nations, write constitutions, challenge injustices, and comfort the dying dot. It is this power, this inner empire, that the superior general holds in trust, not as emperor, but as caretaker. He does not crown kings, but he forms them. He does not command the church, but he helps guide it. He does not stand above, but beside dot to the world outside that may still feel like mystery. How can one man lead thousands across so many countries, causes, and crises? How can he remain so unseen and yet so present? Perhaps it is because he does not lead alone. He leads with history, with tradition, with the collective strength of thousands bound by vows, bound by mission, bound by a flame lit 5 centuries ago, and the wounded soul of a Spanish soldier. And so this final chapter is not a conclusion, but a curtain drawn gently to the side, revealing the quiet room behind, the stage, the letters waiting to be answered, the map on the wall with pins in distant places, the crucifix above the desk, the silence between 2 prayers. It is here, in this still place, that the Black Pope continues his work, and perhaps always will. Let your thoughts rest on that quiet kingdom. Let your breath follow the rhythm of its pulse, slow, steady, serene. No crowns, no applause, no statues. Just purpose, just service, just presence. The world may always hunger for spectacle, for drama, for secrets hidden in locked rooms. But the real story was never locked. It has always been in plain sight, told not in shouts, but in whispers, not in empires that rose and fell, but in lives that were changed, shaped, and set. And as you drift now into sleep, know that you carry a part of that story with you, not as myth, not as suspicion, but as stillness, a stillness that sees, a stillness that listens, a stillness that remembers. The Black Pope is not a ghost of Rome. He is its memory keeper, its quiet fire, its humble shepherd of a kingdom that was never crowned because it never needed to be dot. It simply was, and still is. Good night, dear listener. The dome is quiet. The letters are sealed. The story is told. Now, rest. What is left when the echoes fade? When cathedrals close their doors? For the night when students tuck their books beneath their desks, when robes are folded and prayers grow still, what remains is silence, but not the silence of absence, the silence of presence deep, intentional, alive, the story of the Black Pope, the Superior General of the Society of Jesus, has been one of paradox and patience, of unseen leadership, and disciplined legacy. It has taken us through centuries of intrigue and devotion, myth and mission. But now, in this final chapter, we return not to history, but to the present moment. And we ask, what does this quiet power mean in a world so loud? Today's world pulses with noise-scrolling headlines, crowded screens, voices in conflict, truth contested. In such a climate, the idea of a man who leads through reflection, who governs through service, who speaks in soft tones and steady acts might seem almost foreign. Yet that is precisely what the Jesuit model offers, a different rhythm, a different way of being God in a world that races, it waits. In a world that shouts, it listens. In a world that demands, it discerns. The Superior General, no longer shrouded in medieval myth, but living, breathing, present, continues his work from Rome with the same calm authority that guided his predecessors. He is not chasing power, but anchoring purpose. He does not react. He responds. Every letter, every meeting, every decision emerges from a deep place of listening to God, to the world, to the voices of the poor, the young, the wounded. The hopeful the Jesuits he leads are still on every continent, teaching in refugee camps, publishing in universities, walking with prisoners, sitting with the dying, forming the next generation, not just in intellect, but in integrity. They are not building empires. They are tending the soul of the world, one person at a time. And so the story comes full circle, from Ignatius in his cave, wounded and awakening, to Ricci in his cell, silenced but faithful, to Francis on the papal balcony, carrying Jesuit fire. In a white robe, the thread remains unbroken. The vase still holds and the silence still speaks. As you rest now, feel the weight of centuries growing soft against your shoulders. Let go of myths that confuse, fears that distort. Let your thoughts settle on the truth beneath the tale, that some of the greatest powers in history wore no crowns, raised no banners, but bent the world gently toward light. This is the final breath of the story. Not a revelation, but a reflection. Not a secret, but a stillness. The Black Pope remains, not to rule, but to remind, not to command, but to carry forward. The Jesuit mission continues not in shadows, but in the lives it touches, one whisper. At a time. Sleep now, wrapped in the quiet comfort of knowing. There is a power that does not boast, a leadership that does not roar, a wisdom that does not need to win, only to serve. And somewhere in Rome, beneath the dome and the stars, a man in black turns another page, answers another letter, and keeps the candle burning. Good night, listener. The journey is complete. The silence is full, and in that silence the story goes on. But the world had changed. The Enlightenment had left its mark on Europe. Faith had been challenged, reason elevated. Monarchies were weakening. Revolutions still flickered in the distance, and the Church itself had suffered wounds not easily healed. The Jesuits, too, had changed. They returned not as the feared giants of old, but as cautious caretakers of a fragile age. No longer at the center of courts or thrones, they returned to classrooms and confessionals, to whispered counsel, to the work of slow rebuilding. Still, the memory of their past cast a long shadow. Some welcomed them, others mistrusted. In certain countries, their restoration was met with protests and unease. The idea of the Black Pope, of a secretive, commanding figure at the helm of a vast network, still stirred the old fears. Was this return a revival of spiritual strength, or a rekindling of invisible power? The Jesuits answered not with arguments, but with action. They rebuilt schools across Europe and the Americas. They resumed missions in Asia where ancient knowledge met new voices. They translated texts, advised bishops, and trained future generations with the same rigor and devotion that had marked their earliest years. But now they moved differently, softer, more deliberate. The trauma of suppression had refined their purpose. They would no longer seek visibility. They would seek depth. The Superior General, too, adapted. His authority remained immense within the order, but his visibility remained low. He did not seek the spotlight. He operated from Rome, overseeing the growth of a network that had been buried but never broken. His office resumed its old rhythm, issuing letters of guidance, receiving reports from missions afar, discerning vocations, but always with the memory of fragility in mind. Power, they had learned, could vanish overnight. And so now it was wielded only with prayer and patience. As night settles around you now, let your thoughts drift to those early days of return, the quiet unpacking of long-sealed trunks in Jesuit colleges, the cautious footsteps of priests re-entering chapels once emptied, the faint hum of Latin prayers whispered once more beneath vaulted ceilings. Picture the Superior General, seated in a modest room, reading reports by lamplight from lands both near and distant, knowing that what had been restored was not merely an order, but a legacy. And let this truth settle gently within you, that what is cast down may yet rise, that silence does not mean absence, that those who serve in shadows often carry the brightest flame. The Black Pope had returned not with thunder, but with roots deeper than fear, stronger than exile, and ready to grow once more. Sleep now, gently, for the story continues. Next, in Chapter 11, we follow the Jesuits across the sea as they plant their legacy in the fertile soil of a new world, America. Across the vast oceans, beyond Europe's fading shadows, lay a new world, wild, untamed, and full of promise. Here the Jesuits found fertile soil for their mission. Far from the courts and conspiracies of Rome and Paris, the Americas became a canvas on which the Society of Jesus could paint anew, lending faith, education, and cultural encounter with a patient hand. From the early days of exploration, Jesuit missionaries journeyed into the heart of dense forests and across sweeping plains, seeking to plant seeds of knowledge among indigenous peoples and colonists alike. Their goal was not conquest, but connection, to understand languages, to translate scriptures, and to build bridges between worlds. Theirs was a labor of slow growth, often marked by sacrifice, endurance, and the quiet courage to face unknown dangers. In the great missions of Paraguay, the Jesuits created communities that thrived under their guidance. These settlements were unique experiments, places where indigenous traditions blended with Catholic faith in a delicate balance. A The Jesuits taught reading, music, agriculture, and faith, fostering societies that challenged the harsh colonial status quo. They became protectors as much as teachers, standing against exploitation by colonial powers and settler violence. But this flourishing did not come without conflict. Local governors, settlers, and rival religious orders often viewed the Jesuit missions with suspicion and hostility. The autonomy granted to these communities threatened political control and economic interests. As their influence grew, so too did the push to dismantle their work. The eventual expulsion of the Jesuits from Spanish territories in 1767 struck hard at these thriving settlements, scattering their communities and halting their progress. Yet the roots planted in the Americas endured. Jesuit scholars documented native languages, preserving knowledge that might have otherwise been lost. Their contributions to education laid foundations for future institutions, and the spirit of their missions inspired generations of indigenous leaders and scholars. When the society was restored in the 19th century, Jesuits returned to America with renewed purpose. They founded colleges and universities, adapting their ancient discipline to the New World's needs. These institutions became beacons of learning, shaping minds and hearts across the continent. Tonight, as your breathing slows and your mind drifts, imagine the soft rustle of leaves in a distant forest, the quiet chant of prayers mingling with the songs of birds. Picture the gentle footsteps of missionaries walking unknown trails, their hearts full of hope and faith. Think of the seeds they planted, some taken root, some scattered by wind, but all part of a larger story that stretches across centuries. And continents. Let your thoughts settle on the enduring power of quiet dedication, the slow, patient work that changes worlds not with force, but with love and learning. And prepare, as we journey next to Chapter 12, into the halls of power once more, where the Black Pope's influence takes shape amid political storms and papal intrigue. Beneath the grandeur of St. Peter's Basilica, amid soaring arches and the quiet echo of whispered prayers, another kind of power hums softly in the Vatican's corridors. Here, where faith meets governance, the Black Pope, the Superior General of the Society of Jesus, cast a subtle but persistent shadow. Though not a pope in the traditional sense, the Black Pope wields influence not by decree or crown, but through networks of education, diplomacy, and spiritual counsel. His authority is both invisible and vast, threading through the delicate tapestry of papal politics. Since their restoration in 1814, the Jesuits quietly re-established themselves within the Church's hierarchy. Their colleges educated future priests and leaders. Their missionaries extended the Church's reach. Their scholars engaged in theological debates shaping doctrine. Yet their influence often stoked suspicion. In a world increasingly wary of centralized power and secretive orders, the Jesuits walked a fine line, serving the Pope faithfully while nurturing their own global network. The Vatican itself is a city of mysteries, a stage where politics intertwines with faith, where alliances form behind closed doors, and where decisions ripple out to affect millions. Within this crucible, Jesuit influence ebbs and flows, sometimes overt, often subtle. Superior generals have advised popes, influenced conclaves, and shaped church policy. They have acted as confessors to powerful men, wielding the intimate power of personal counsel. They have negotiated delicate agreements, smoothing tensions between Rome and restless kingdoms or republics. This influence is never absolute. It is tempered by rival factions, the ambitions of cardinals, the scrutiny of monarchs, and the watchful eyes of secular governments. Yet it endures, a quiet current beneath the visible church. One must remember, the Black Pope's power is not coercion but persuasion, not command but counsel. His strength lies in patience and wisdom, a gradual shaping of thought rather than a sudden seizure of control. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, Jesuits have played key roles during turbulent times, advising popes through revolutions, world wars, and ideological shifts. They have often been the Church's bridge to the modern world, interpreting its challenges and adapting its teachings. Their colleges have become centers for social justice, scientific inquiry, and intercultural dialogue, an evolution from the purely spiritual to the broadly human. Yet the idea of the Black Pope continues to inspire both awe and suspicion. Conspiracy theories linger in shadows, fueled by secrecy and misunderstandings. The truth is more complex, rooted in centuries of devoted service, intellectual rigor, and the delicate dance of influence behind the papal throne. As your mind softens and your breath deepens, picture the quiet rooms of the Vatican after hours lamplight, flickering on ancient texts, hushed footsteps on marble. A figure in black moving silently through corridors lined with centuries of faith. Imagine the weight of responsibility carried in those silent moments, the balancing act of serving both God and Church in a world forever in flux. Let these images settle gently in your thoughts, a reminder that power often lives in subtlety, and that the greatest influence can be wielded in silence. And now, as we prepare to move forward, the story will take us deeper into the lives of men and women shaped by the Jesuit legacy teachers, missionaries and guardians of a quiet empire. In the long, tense silence that followed the Second World War, the world divided, not just into East and West, but into ideologies, democracy and communism, faith and atheism, freedom and control. And in this new kind of battlefield, where bombs were replaced by ideas and borders by belief systems, the Jesuits took their place, not with rifles or banners, but with books, classrooms, and quiet counsel. It was a new war. And the Black Pope, once again, had a role to play. The Cold War was not only a geopolitical conflict, it was a philosophical war, fought in lecture halls, churches, newspapers, and whispered strategy sessions. Soviet atheism spread like smoke through the East, while the West sought to preserve its spiritual and moral grounding. In this ideological vacuum, the Jesuits, masters of rhetoric, logic, and education, became quiet warriors of thought. Not combatants, but strategists. Jesuit colleges and universities around the world became intellectual outposts, training leaders not only in theology, but in history, political theory, literature, and international relations. From Georgetown in Washington, D.C. to Sophia University in Tokyo, Jesuit institutions became nurseries for those who would one day shape policy and defend principle. Their students included diplomats, journalists, future politicians, even those who would one day sit at negotiation tables between nations perched on the edge of nuclear fire. Inside the Vatican, too, the ideological war was felt. The Jesuits advised the Papacy on how to navigate the changing moral landscape, how to confront communism without losing compassion, how to speak truth to oppression without stoking war. The superior general, as always, stood just behind the curtain, watching, writing, guiding. His letters during this era reveal not confrontation, but careful discernment. The Church was to resist not only external pressure, but also the temptation to become a pawn in political games. Jesuit missionaries, too, continued their work behind the Iron Curtain. Some were expelled. Others operated in secrecy, their identities hidden, their gatherings quiet. In places like Poland, the Jesuit presence persisted even under surveillance. Their resilience nourished faith where hope had been driven underground. They offered not just doctrine, but courage. In Latin America, the Cold War took on another shape, one of revolution and repression. Here, some Jesuits became involved in the controversial movement of liberation theology, seeking to align Christian teaching with the struggles of the poor and oppressed. It was a bold, complex stance welcomed by many, criticized by others, and carefully watched by Rome. The Black Pope of the time, Pedro Arup, stood at a crossroads supporting the Jesuit mission to serve the marginalized while navigating the political minefields such stances created. Pedro Arup was not a pope, yet he led a global spiritual army through one of its most politically charged eras. He had survived Hiroshima as a young missionary. He knew what it meant to live through fire, and he led the Jesuits with compassion, intellect, and quiet conviction. He called the society not to power, but to presence, not to ideology, but to service. And through it all, he remained fiercely loyal to the Church, even as he urged it forward. As night settles around you, let your thoughts drift across borders into classrooms filled with quiet debate, into underground chapels where candles flicker in defiance, into the handwritten pages of a Jesuit priest exiled in a strange land. Let your mind rest on the idea that even in the Cold War's sharpest tension, there were those whose strength came not from domination, but from reflection, not from noise, but from silence. And now, as the Cold War ends and the world begins to shift once more, we look ahead to a remarkable moment, the first time a Jesuit becomes the Bishop of Rome himself. Join us in Chapter 14, where the man, once shaped by the Black Pope, becomes Pope himself. In March of 2013, as the white smoke curled into the Roman sky and the bells of St. Peter's rang out across the cobbled streets of the Eternal City, the world turned its eyes toward the ancient balcony above the square. A new pope had been chosen. But this time, something was different, something quietly historic. For the first time in the Church's 2,000-year history, a Jesuit had been elected to the papacy. The man who stepped forward was Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. But to those who understood the deeper current flowing beneath tradition, the question emerged softly, almost as a whisper. Had the Black Pope become the White? Francis named for St. Francis of Assisi. Not Ignatius of Loyola presented himself simply. A man of humility, he greeted the crowd with a bowed head and a request for prayer. There was no grandeur in his gestures, no thunder in his voice. And yet, behind the simplicity stood a complexity shaped by decades of Jesuit formation. For Bergoglio had not merely studied among the Jesuits, he had been formed by them, trained in the spiritual exercises, disciplined by obedience, shaped by contemplation and mission. He had once even served as the provincial superior of the Jesuits in Argentina, but he was also different. During Argentina's turbulent political years, Bergoglio walked a narrow path between the state, the people, and the church. His leadership was sometimes praised, sometimes questioned, but always it was marked by restraint by that Jesuit trait of measured action, of preferring the influence of presence over proclamation. Now, as Pope, he carried that same quiet force into the very heart of Rome. His election prompted questions, both symbolic and strategic. Would a Jesuit Pope revive the intellectual assertiveness of the society? Would he strengthen the influence of the Superior General or remain independent from it? Would he act as a bridge or a reformer? Observers wondered. Would this papacy signal a new age of Jesuit influence at the highest level, or its careful distancing? Pope Francis answered not with words, but with gestures. He refused the papal palace, chose simpler vestments, rode in a modest car, dined in common halls. He spoke of mercy before law, compassion before correction. He washed feet of refugees, women, prisoners. He warned against the church becoming self-referential. He urged pastors to smell like the sheep. These were not mere theatrics. They were hallmarks of Jesuit spirituality: humility, service, discernment, presence. And yet, Francis also surprised some Jesuits. Though he had once been their superior, his relationship with the global society of Jesus had been complex. He had favored simplicity over academic debate. He had questioned the order's political engagements. Now, as Pope, he walked with a Jesuit heart, but not always by its institutional rhythm. The Black Pope, at the time Adolfo Nicholas, continued to lead the society as Superior General. His role remained spiritual, strategic, and largely out of the public eye. No great collision occurred, no merging of thrones, but a new kind of harmony took shape. In Pope Francis, the world saw a white pope with the soul of a Jesuit, not the commander of the order, but its most visible child, a man steeped in silence, shaped by discernment, and yet now commanding from the spotlight. It was a delicate irony. The Society of Jesus, known for avoiding higher ecclesial office, had produced a pontiff, and in doing so, it had blurred the ancient line between advisor and sovereign. But Francis did not use his office to empower the Jesuits alone. Instead, he took the spiritual DNA of the order, its heart for the poor, its call to accompaniment, its insistence on internal freedom, and embedded it into the wider church. His reforms touched not just administration, but culture. He began reshaping how the church speaks, listens, and moves. He elevated voices from the margins. He convened synods with open dialogue. He encouraged the church to listen before preaching, to walk before ruling, and behind it all quietly, consistently, one could hear the echo of Loyola's first command: go and set the world on fire. Tonight, as your thoughts slow and stillness surrounds you, imagine the image of Pope Francis walking quietly through St. Peter's Square at dusk, his white robes catching the last golden light. Picture the long line of Jesuits who came before, him missionaries, teachers, confessors, martyrs, each one a thread in the fabric of this gentle, unlikely papacy. See, too, the Black Pope still seated in the shadows of the Curia, not rivaling, but complementing. The shepherd in black guiding the order, the shepherd in white guiding the church, not one replacing the other, but two legacies entwined, rooted in service, humility, and quiet power. Let your thoughts rest here on the convergence of white and black, crown and cassock, spotlight and silence, and prepare, as the next chapter leads us from the papal courts to another form of expression where the Jesuits craft their influence not through politics or doctrine, but through beauty, symbol, and art. Chapter 15 awaits. Symbols in ink and iron. Before a Jesuit speaks, he often listens. Before he teaches, he studies. And before he commands, he reflects. But when a Jesuit builds, when he leaves behind stone and symbol, he tells a story meant not just to be seen, but to be felt. Throughout the centuries, the Society of Jesus has not only trained minds and guided hearts, it has carved its presence into the physical world with quiet grandeur. In gold leaf and hidden symbols, in dramatic ceilings and whispered geometry, the Jesuits told a tale of divine order, spiritual ascent, and the subtle presence of power. This is the language of Jesuit aesthetics, a world where architecture becomes theology and symbolism becomes a silent catechism. From the moment of their founding, the Jesuits understood something deeply human, that beauty moves the soul, not as decoration, but as invitation. Beauty could awaken reverence where words might falter. It could whisper mysteries the tongue dared not speak aloud. And so they built not merely schools and churches, but experiences. They raised sanctuaries where every surface told a story, where every shadow and beam of light was designed to lead the eye upward toward heaven, toward mystery, toward transformation. The Church of the Jesuit in Rome, the mother church of the Jesuits, remains a breathtaking testament to this philosophy. Its facade is restrained, classical, harmonious, but step inside, and the world shifts. The ceiling seems to open to the heavens, filled with clouds, saints, golden light, and the triumphant figure of Christ. The central fresco, the Triumph of the Name of Jesus by Giovanni Battista Galli, is not just art, it is theology in motion. Figures spill from the frame. Shadows dissolve into light. Illusion and reality blur. It is a spiritual theater, a declaration. This is not just a building. This is a portal. Jesuit art was not confined to Europe. In Asia, the Americas, and Africa, they adapted their aesthetics to local cultures, infusing Chinese brushwork with Christian symbolism, sculpting Andean saints with Incan influence, composing music that blended European structure with African rhythm. Their art was not imposition, it was dialogue. Not conquest, it was translation. Every altar, painting, and carved lintel was a bridge between cultures, languages, and hearts. Their symbolism, too, carried layered meaning. The IHS monogram, an abbreviation of Jesus' name in Greek, became the emblem of the society. But within its sunburst frame, Jesuits saw more, a light that conquers darkness, a center that unites all directions, a name that calls, comforts, commands. You would find this emblem carved into wood, painted on ceilings, stitched into vestments, always present, always glowing at the center of Jesuit identity. Iron, too, became a medium for meaning. Jesuit buildings were often constructed with restraint on the outside, but designed with intricate ironwork inside grills, gates, and lanterns forged into delicate patterns of vines, stars, and crosses. Iron represented strength, yes, but also formation. raw ore shaped by fire and purpose, just as a Jesuit is shaped by years of prayer and obedience. Their artistic mission extended into the printed word. Jesuit presses published thousands of books, not only in theology, but in science, geography, mathematics, and linguistics. Their maps of the world were often among the most accurate. Their botanical sketches, detailed and meticulous, were both art and record dot through the printed page. They shaped both imagination and intellect dot, and in their art, as in their mission. They often walked a delicate line, bold in vision, but subtle in influence. Their works did not declare power, they suggested presence. Their buildings did not dominate cities, they welcomed. Their symbols were not weapons, they were invitations, because the true aim of Jesuit art was not to glorify itself, but to move the soul closer to God. Tonight, as shadows settle around your room and silence returns to the world, imagine walking through a quiet Jesuit chapel. Feel the cool stone underfoot, the scent of beeswax and incense in the air. Let your gaze rise following the curves of arches, the shimmer of gold against shadow, the quiet radiance of a painted saint reaching toward eternity. This is not just decoration. This is spiritual architecture, a language that speaks not to the ear but to the heart. Let your thoughts drift now, as if lying beneath a great fresco, letting your spirit rise with the figures above. Rest in the knowledge that faith can be felt in pigment and pattern, in carved wood and whispered light. And as we prepare to turn the page, the story moves next into the world of ideas and suspicions, where beauty turns to shadow, and the Jesuits face not admiration, but accusation.